Ned Stark is a very honorable man, and there are certain things that bother him, and one of them is the killing of children. This produced a rift between Robert and him back during the rebellion when King's Landing fell and the Lannister men killed Prince Rhaegar's two young children and wrapped the little bodies in cloaks and presented them to Robert. Ned was sickened by this and quarreled with Robert over it. When he finds out about the incest between Cersei and Jaime and deduces that, as Jon Arryn did before him, that the Queen's three children, none of them are fathered by Robert. Ned knows that if he tells Robert this, Robert's rage will be unbounded. I mean, Cersei will certainly die. Jaime will probably die. But also the children will die. Robert will put these three children to death, these illegitimate kids, and it'll be a repetition of the nightmare that he remembers from the fall of King's Landing. And his honor and his decency prod him to meet with Cersei and tell her what he's learned, and to warn her to leave King's Landing, to take the children and flee, because Robert's wrath is going to follow them to the ends of the earth. But it's the only way he sees that she can save those three kids of hers. So it's an honorable thing to do, but of course, in terms of sheer power politics and guile, it's a foolish thing to do. The Hand is the prime minister. He's the chief counselor of the king. He speaks for the king with the king's voice when the king is not available. He's the king's chief counselor when the council assembles and all that. Robert has depended on Jon Arryn, his kind of surrogate father, for all these years, but now Jon Arryn is dead, and he has to find a new hand, and Ned Stark is the man that he trusts most. His boyhood friend, the companion who fought beside him in the war, but who is far removed from the intrigues of King's Landing. I mean, Robert could much more easily have chosen a present council member. He could have turned to his brother Stannis. He could have turned to one of the Lannisters, Lord Tywin, for example, who was the hand of the Mad King for many years and was very qualified, a very strong and competent hand. He could have turned to him. He could have turned to Jaime Lannister, which is what Cersei wants, his queen wants. He doesn't want any of those people. He doesn't trust any of those people. He wants Ned, who he trusted, who he grew up with, who helped him win the throne. But of course, by selecting Ned, he's making enemies elsewhere among the people he's not selecting. So that starts a lot of things rolling. Lady is sentenced to die, but it's Ned who takes it on himself to do it, because of the ethos of the Starks, which is the man who passes the sentence should swing the sword. He's not going to give his daughter's wolf to any of the Lannisters to kill. He's going to do it himself as compassionately as it is. It's a difficult task, but if it has to be done, he'll do it. So it says something about him. And of course, that scene also says something about Robert, and that's ominous, I think, is that Robert doesn't stand up to Cersei in that scene when she demands. Lady was completely innocent of the whole incident, but she's being a little vindictive there, and Robert is caving in before him. And that gives you, I think, an indication of the character of Robert, too. Robert does not like that kind of conflict. Robert likes the kind of conflict that he can win by hitting his opponent with a warhammer, but he doesn't like the kind of verbal argument, wrangling and back and forth, and that sort of thing just drives him crazy. He just wants it over with. Okay, you want that? I don't care about that. Do it. Let's stop this, House Stark is thousands of years old. They have ruled the North going back into the mists of time. But for the last 300 years, they have only been lords. They have been subservient to the Iron Throne. When Aegon the Conqueror came, and he conquered most of the southern kingdoms, Torrhen Stark had come south with a large army of Northmen to confront him. But after the field for fire, he knew it was doomed, and so he knelt. And he was the last king of the North, and the first who was simply Lord of Winterfell and a vassal of the Iron Throne, ruling as a secondary ruler, subject to the laws of the Targaryens. But that was only 300 years ago. Before that, you have thousands of years of history in which the Starks were kings. At the time of the scene we're talking about, the Targaryens have been deposed. That was the house that Torrhen knelt to, the Targaryens. The Baratheons have effectively been deposed because Robert is dead, and the new king, Joffrey, is not in fact actually his heir, but is pure Lannister. And the Lords of the North and the Lords of the Riverlands, who are present at the same time, who are allied with Robb Stark by virtue of his mother and that whole House Tully bloodline, don't see why they should be subject to this Lannister king. Why make a peace and just go back to being a lord? Why not go back to being the separate kingdom again? So they hail Robb as the king in the north, and he becomes the first Stark to actually wear a crown for 300 years.